Hey, this is Ike. I'm excited to be making my first video for PokerSavvyPlus.com. I'm going to be playing 4 tables of 9-handed 1-2 no limit on PokerStars. I was having a bit of a hard time deciding whether I wanted to do 3 or 4. So if a few hands come up at the same time and I don't get to talk about everything as it happens, I apologize. Feel free to post any questions you have about anything in the video on the forums at PokerSavvyPlus. I'm just going to be talking about hands as they come up and trying to relate them to broader concepts as things arise, and here we go. So, haven't really been dealt any hands quite yet. I'm going to be folding all of these. One sort of general topic that I'm going to be focusing on a lot over the course of this video is looking for spots where you can rely on your opponents to be doing too much folding. I think that a very large percentage of the players in 1-2 FullRing games make a lot of systematic mistakes of folding too much in certain spots. They don't defend their blinds enough, they limp from early position with a weak range and then call a raise and check fold a lot of flops. A lot of them will open a huge range from late position, then fold all of it to re-raises. So I'm going to be looking at the different player types and looking at ways to exploit their tendencies. So for instance, this Queen-9 off in the cutoff right here. If it's folded to me, this is one of the worst hands I would consider opening here, but I would open it. I would be raising to 6. I think it's just about good enough to steal the blinds. I would not be going with Queen-8 off or Jack-8 off there, but I think Queen-9 off is good enough. I think especially with somebody like Mucked Boy here as the big blind who's playing 6% of his hands, I stand to show a profit stealing his blinds very loose. And a lot of the players in these games open to 4 times the big blind. I think it's preferable to be opening to 3 times the big blind because of what I was just saying about tending to open pretty loose and be pretty aggressive about trying to steal blinds. The unfortunate side effect of that is that when I get called and see a flop, on average I'm going to be behind my opponents. So I want the pots to be small when we do see a flop, both because I do stand to be behind a lot of the time when I get called, and because it gives me more room to maneuver to have the pot smaller relative to the effective stacks. I'm going to go ahead and open deuces here. I open any pocket pair first in from any position. A lot of players like to limp small pocket pairs in these games, and I do think you'll show a profit doing that, but I think you'll show a bigger profit by playing them for a raise. And I'm going to raise ace-queen to 4 times the big blind here against that limp. I would also raise ace-jack and king-queen here, but not any weaker unpaired unsuited hands. I like raising it to 4 times the big blind out of position there because it helps to negate the positional disadvantage to make the pot a little bigger pre-flop, and also because you just want to charge them more to see the flop when you're out of position, because you're at a disadvantage when you do. Same idea here. If it's folded to me in the small blind, I'll open to 8 to 4 times the big blind, because I'm going to be out of position. The bigger raise is better. Alright, I flopped the nuts. I'm gonna go ahead and make a normal size c-bet here. I'm likely to take it down a whole lot of the time, but I think it's better to do this than anything else. Checking it on that board is not likely to get much action. Looks like I've flopped 1 pair when I do check it, so. Alright, I got called. I'm just gonna keep firing. Go with 32 here. Nice big bet. hopefully he's got a good piece of it. Something like King Jack would be ideal. And if I get raised, I'm very happily going to stack off here. Sometimes he's Queen 10, but that's how it goes, if that's how it goes. I'm going to raise this limp. I'm raising that limp with any ace and with a lot of other hands. Probably raising small blind to big blind limp with a little over 50% of my hands there. Generally, players don't limp the small blind strong, I've found, and making a small raise there puts a lot of pressure on them because you're going to have a positional advantage for the rest of the hand. You're pretty happy with either outcome of them calling and then having to play a pot against you when you're in position, or with them folding and you taking it down pre-flop. I'm going to fold ace-jack to this raise. I don't think it's very close. I'd be folding ace-queen too. Raising the short stack's early position limp is a sign of strength because short stacks generally limp pretty tight, and he's pretty likely to be re-raising here. So, yeah. I'm going to open to 8 with this Queen 8 suited. Because there's a poster, I need to make my raise a little bigger than my standard 6. I'm going to complete the Queen 9 off up there. And I'm going to fold to the poster's re-raise there. I clearly have no fold equity on a 4-bet, and I don't think my hand is good enough to felt it, even though he's probably pretty loose there. I flopped an open-ender here with the Queen 9. I'm going to go ahead and lead out for 3/4 pot. Going back to that hand where the short stack limp re-raised from under the gun, that reminds me that an important thing to be paying attention to in these games is the difference between winning short stacks and fishy short stacks. There are going to be short stacks who limp constantly and usually have trash and are usually folding, and there are going to be short stacks who are mostly limp re-raising, and looking at your poker tracker stats should really help you to identify that. I'm going to fire the second barrel with this Queen 9. That's a good card to continue the bluff on, since I would have led out with a flush draw on the flop. These jacks are a fold. I think it's very likely somebody has queens or better with this action. Queens would have been a lot closer. I might have flat called queens there. Kings and aces I would have just shoved. Ace-king I also would have shoved. Flat calling the jacks wouldn't have been horrible, but I would have been planning to rarely put money in without flopping a set if I had. A big part of the reason that I'd be shoving ace-king there is that having an ace and a king in my hand significantly reduces the probability that one of the other players has aces or kings. So that's why shoving ace-king in a spot like that is better than shoving queens. But if I were in one of their positions and somebody from my position had shoved, I would be happier to be calling with queens. So with this 10-8 off here, this is about the worst hand I'd consider opening from the cutoff. I might fold it anyhow, but we've got several very tight players behind me. All three of these guys are playing very few hands. I think I stand to show a profit with almost any 2 cards opening from the cutoff there. And you don't want to do it every time, because your opponents probably have Poker Tracker and probably have a HUD, and they'll see your stats, and you don't want your numbers to get too high. But yeah, if you look at the voluntarily put into pot percentages that I have displayed in the lower right corner of these tables, one of them, the VPIP for the table is below 9, and the other at 13, and the other two right in the neighborhood of 15. 15 is fairly normal for a FullRing game, even at bigger stakes, but 9 or 12 is really, really tight. These guys are making bad folds pre-flop, and you want to exploit that by open raising a lot. Ace-8 2 off the button's not quite good enough. Ace-10 I would certainly raise. I think Ace-9 is very marginal. Even with all I've said, I don't like raising Ace-8 2 off the button. You might think that the 42% VPIP in the big blind here would be another reason not to do that, but I really don't feel that's the case. I actually think that that guy is more of a reason to be open raising loose, because even though he's making a mistake of calling too much, he's still making a mistake, and he's passive, and I'm quite happy to play pots in position with him, even with pretty trashy hands. But all those things considered, I still don't think Ace-8 is quite good enough. Any suited ace, I certainly would have opened there. In fact, any suited 2-gapper down to 7-4, I would have opened there too. Any suited connector, 1-gapper is probably down to like, certainly 6-4, maybe 5-3. Suited, that is. So one thing I started talking about earlier, and then I got dealt a couple hands and got distracted and started dealing with those, was identifying the difference between a good short stack and a bad short stack. And like this guy who's on the button in the bottom right table, Illuya, is almost certainly a good short stack. He's playing very tight, he is raising much more than he's calling or limping. So that guy, I would expect, anytime he puts some money in the pot, it's very likely he's going to put his stack in, and you don't want to be getting involved in pots against a player like that without a pretty strong hand. I just opened Ace-3 off on the button here. This guy CVN7 is an example of a not-so-strong short stack, I think. He's calling a lot more than he's raising pre-flop. He has a bit more than a minimum buy-in. In any case, I'm going to fold to this lead out. It's too likely he has a big piece of the board, even though I have bottom pair and an overcard. And in general, I like to raise lead outs, but that's a board that's pretty good for his cold call range, and I think we're beat here. And we can't find out without committing. Not our stack, but his stack. We can't find out without committing ourselves to an all-in pot. I mentioned the fact that this guy has a bit more than a minimum buy-in as a sign that he might be a weaker short stack. It's certainly not as strong an indication as his... It's certainly not as strong an indication as his stats, but most of the winning short stacks tend to quit once they've doubled up, but even once they've picked up a significant number of chips. And I don't think Ace-Jack is good enough to continue against that re-raise. Ace-Queen would be very close. Ace-King, Jacks plus I would certainly play. And I would continue by re-raising with all of them, planning... Well, no, we're actually kind of deep here. I would continue by re-raising with Ace-King, certainly, Kings and Queens a lot of the time, and I would flat Aces and Jacks. a decent amount. The reason I do that is that jacks I don't really want to get all in pre-flop, and aces are so strong, so unlikely to be outflopped that slow playing them is good. Ace-king really wants to get all in pre-flop, maximize its pre-flop semi-bluffing value because it's so rarely dominated pre-flop, but also so rarely way ahead. And sort of a reverse implied odds hand, because when we hit it, they'll usually know we hit it. It's going to be hard to stack jacks on an ace-high board. And then, in order to balance the fact that I really want to get in with ace-king pre-flop, I also want to be re-raising some strong hands so that he's put to a tough decision with queens and jacks. So I'm going to be re-raising kings and queens a lot of the time. I'm going to fold this jack-queen suited to the early position raiser here if it's folded around to me. I think that it's a mistake to be playing very many hands at all from the blinds against an early position raiser, and I think that this other caller doesn't even make a difference here. I'm still going to be folding the jack-queen suited. Hands I would want to play there would be ace-queen suited. Ace-king off, I'd be re-raising. Ace-queen suited, I'd be calling. And with the second caller in there, I would be calling any pocket pair, mostly just trying to flop a set. And then I would be re-raising probably aces and kings. I'd be flatting even queens there. It's really hard to get action from a worse hand when someone's under the gun raising range is as tight as this guy's probably is. So, flatting even kings is worth consideration there. I'd be re-raising aces and ace-king, for sure. And kings a lot. Because nobody folds queens even when they know they should. Without a second player in the pot, I think ace-queen suited is a fold to that early position raise. If I was on the button, I would call it in a heartbeat, but out of position, the hand is much worse, and I don't think it's a call. Here, this ace-jack, I don't think is quite good enough to call, but I think it's a perfect hand to re-raise with. This guy who has less than a full buy-in and limped is probably a weak player. There's a good chance Sandviper knows that, even though I don't know anything about either of them. So Sandviper is probably raising him pretty loose, and probably folding a lot to my re-raises. So it's a good spot to make a little pre-flop semi-bluff. I like complete with the ace-3 off here. Folding it's not a disaster, but with what appear to be a couple of weak limpers in the pot, I think I can play it profitably against them even out of position. I like opening the 7-6 suited here under the gun. Against a bet and a raise, I have an easy fold there. Something I want to point out about this open raise with 7-6 suited here is that I would not be making the same open with a hand like, say, 9-7 suited. A lot of players really underestimate the difference between true suited connectors and suited gappers. The suited connectors flop open-ended straight draws a lot more, and that makes a big difference. It's the sort of thing you would never really notice just by playing the hands and sort of feeling it out. The hands feel like they play about the same, but if you look at the math, there are a lot more combinations of flops where the true suited connectors flop an open-ended straight draw are better than there are for the one-gappers. And similarly, when you flop two-pair with a suited connector, it's a lot more likely that your opponent has flopped a good draw that you can get your stack in against. I'm just going to check this queen jack. I don't think raising would be terrible, but with this guy playing less than a full stack, I think checking is the better play. Flopped a good draw here. You'll lead out for a little less than a pot-sized bet. Alright, and I turned a pair to go with it. The decision is now basically between, do I want to bet again and then bet the river 2 and try and bluff him off of a king, or do I want to check and hope to get to showdown with my pair of queens and win? And I think that checking and trying to get to showdown with the pair of queens is the way to go, largely because it's unlikely for him to have exactly a pair of kings here. With the queen and the 10 on the board, he's very likely to have 2 pair when he does have a king. So I think there are relatively few hands that are beating me, but that I can get to fold. I have far too many outs to consider folding myself here, though, so I'm going to call, and I'm going to check fold bad rivers. That counts as a bad river. Yeah, I think it's very likely he has something like king-queen, or queen-10 here. So I opened with ace-king, I got re-raised. I don't like calling here, I certainly don't like folding. The options are between re-raising small and shoving, and I think out of position the play is just to stick it in. It's a big overbet, but that's fine, because a smaller raise is still committing my stack. I'm not going to make it 60 and then try and decide what to do there. And the only thing to be careful about there is if you're going to make those big overbets all in with ace-king, which I do think is what you should do, you got to do the same thing with kings and queens and so forth. Or you become too easy to read and your opponents can start snap calling you with 10s. In general, something to focus on is, in situations that come up a lot, to be betting the same amount with all of the hands that you're betting. Otherwise, you give away free information, and that's almost always bad. And you'll see that I vary my continuation bet sizes, but I'm not varying my continuation bet sizes based on the hand I have. I'm varying my continuation bet sizes based on the board. When the board is really dry, something like king 2-2, where my opponent is almost certainly either way ahead of me or way behind me, I can make a much smaller continuation bet down to only a little over half pot, usually on boards like that. Whereas on a board like Jack 10-9 with a flush draw, I like to make a larger continuation bet, 3/4 of the pot or more if I'm betting, because it's so likely that they have a draw that I want to charge. Also because it's so likely that I have a draw that I want to build the pot with. And I think I show a profit on a min bet here with no intention of ever putting any more money in the pot. He's only got to be folding it a third of the time there, and I think he easily is. I flop top set with my queens here. I'm going to check it to this guy because it's pretty hard for him to have a big piece of that board with 3 of the 4 queens accounted for. I'm going to limp these 9s. I would need about queens to want to raise there. He bets. I'm going to make it 24 and hope he shoves over it. Calling there wouldn't be too bad, but these guys tend not to fire more than one barrel all that willingly, so I want to just try and get it in on the flop. He called. It's now close again between checking and just sticking it in. I think I'm going to check it to him and hope he shoves. Okay. Gonna stick it in now. I don't think King 4 suited is quite good enough to raise here. Getting back to that Queen's hand, when you flop a monster like that, it can be tricky deciding how to play it, because you're basically just trying against an unknown and against somebody you're not going to play against again a lot. You're basically just trying to trick them into sticking it in with a bad hand, because if they have a big hand, no matter what you do, you're going to stack them. So you're just trying to play your hand in a way that confuses them and gets them to make a mistake with a mediocre holding. So I tried to give him a couple different opportunities to bluff in case he wanted to bluff, tried to give him opportunities to improve to 2-pair so that he could call me, and just generally to play my hand weird so that he could get suspicious and make a bad call down, which is what he ended up doing. He called me with pocket sixes there. So as I get around to the blinds here, I'm going to sit out. I'm going to be finishing up this video in just a minute. After that Queen's hand, it looks like the session's gone pretty well. Up around 3/4 of a buy-in or so. So, just by way of conclusion, if there was anything I glossed over, anything you'd like to hear more about, please post it on the forums on PokerSavvyPlus.com. I would be very happy to respond. If you have any criticism about what I've been talking about or how I've been talking about it, if there's anything you'd like to hear more about, please let me know. I'm new to this and definitely looking to improve. This ace-10 off here is kind of interesting. I think it's an open with the post there. I'm going to make it 8. With the post in there, there's twice as much money to steal by stealing the blinds. So where normally I'd be risking 6 to win 3, with the post in there, I'm risking 8 to win 6. It makes it a little harder to win the pot because there's also more money in there to encourage other people to call. But I think that other people probably don't adjust as much as they should to that, and that makes it generally correct to loosen up your stealing range against most lineups of opponents when there's a post. I'm just going to check call with the ace-deuce parent flush draw here. I don't want to bet and get raised, and I don't think I can 3-barrel him off a jack. I made my flush. It's close between betting and check raising here. I'm going to go for the check raise. Hopefully he's made a big hand, or maybe is willing to make a big call. That may be a bad habit in these games that I'm used to from playing in the bigger stakes games. People value bet a lot more aggressively in the games that I'm used to playing, and so it's better to go for river check raises. It could be that I really should have just bet that river. I would have expected him to value bet a jack, and there's no way for me to know whether or not he actually would have value bet a jack because he only had a pair of 9s. It's hard for me to guess whether or not he would have called a bet there. I think no. I think that the queen is a bad card to go for a value bet on there because it's so likely to improve my hand. I'm so likely to have something like ace-queen or king-queen that it's very credible for me to be value betting a pair of queens there, and so he should be less inclined to call with hands that don't beat a pair of queens. And that's about the worst flop pocket sevens can get. I'm just going to check fold. Still planning on just check folding. Now I'm checking with the intention of calling if he bets. Well, he had pocket fours, and he was thinking about the same thing I was, so I get to win that hand. Anyway, I guess that about wraps up the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And please post on the forums and tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to hear more about. Good luck in your games.